The universe had forgotten the sound of a scream, or perhaps it had never bothered to learn. For 10,000 cycles, the consensus had presided over a quiet cosmos, a placid garden where civilizations were cultivated, pruned, and occasionally weeded out with serene, sterile precision. The consensus was not an empire built on conquest, but an ecosystem engineered for stability, ruled by the progenitors. Beings of such ancient power, they had become less a species and more a geological force. They moved through the void in ships like hollowed-out moons, their thoughts rippling through the subspace networks that bound 1,000 worlds together in enforced tranquility. Their laws were as immutable as gravity, their judgments as final as the heat death of a star. They were shepherds, and the lesser races were their flock, guided, protected, and prevented from ever becoming dangerous, from ever becoming anything more than what the progenitors deemed appropriate. Humanity was a curious specimen in this galactic menagerie, a creature the consensus had discovered barely 3 centuries prior, flinging crude chemical rockets from their muddy little world, a world they called Earth. The initial contact was, like all consensus actions, calm and absolute. They arrived not with fleets of war, but with emissaries of overwhelming technological and psychic might, their very presence silencing the chaotic chatter of human civilization. Humanity, fractured and tribal, still reeling from its own self-inflicted wounds, had no means to resist. They were designated a protected nascent culture, a title that was both a shield and a cage. They were given access to limited consensus technologies, clean energy, atmospheric scrubbers, basic medical marvels just enough to keep them from destroying themselves, but not enough to allow them to reach for the stars on their own terms. The progenitors saw in humanity a familiar pattern, a species of high aggression, rapid technological advancement, and a dangerous capacity for irrational, emotional bonding. Such species were either guided toward tranquility or quietly retired. The progenitors, in their infinite patience, chose to guide. Humanity, however, did not take to guidance. For the first century, they were pliant, awed by the celestial shepherds who had ended their wars and cleaned their poisoned skies. But the cage, no matter how gilded, began to chafe. Humans were forbidden from leaving their solar system. Their scientific inquiries were carefully curated, steered away from weaponization, unsanctioned artificial intelligence, and faster-than-light travel. They were a zoo exhibit, observed and managed by the wardens, a subservient species tasked by the progenitors with overseeing the more volatile cultures. The wardens were tall, willowy beings with skin like polished marble, communicating in harmonious chimes that could soothe a savage beast but grated on the human soul. They were condescending in their perfection, their every action a reminder of humanity's primitive status. Captain Eva Rostova was a product of this gilded cage. She commanded the Starfall, one of Earth's orbital defense cutters, a vessel that was laughably obsolete by consensus standards, but a point of fierce pride for the fledgling United Earth Fleet. Her job was a farce. She was a glorified traffic cop, monitoring shipping lanes within the solar system and ensuring no human vessel attempted to breach the quarantine line drawn at the heliopause. She was born in a world without war, a world of curated peace. Yet she studied history's great conflicts with a morbid fascination. She read of the Mongols, the Romans, of Verdun and Stalingrad, of struggles so savage and absolute they seemed like myths from another reality. She saw the same fire in her own people, banked and smothered beneath layers of consensus-enforced serenity, but still there, waiting for a wind to stoke it back to life. She felt it in herself, a restless energy, a dissatisfaction that gnawed at the edges of the perfect world they had been given. The progenitors saw humanity's potential for violence. Eva saw their potential for survival. The wind came not as a storm of warships, but as a whisper of disease. It began on Titan, in the sprawling helium-3 refineries that powered Earth's clean economy. A synthetic plague, engineered by a radical progenitor faction known as the Abnegators, was released into the processing plants. The Abnegators believed the progenitors' role was not to shepherd, but to cleanse. They saw vibrant, chaotic life as a cancer on the sterile perfection of the universe, and humanity was a particularly aggressive tumor. The plague, designated LV-7, was a masterpiece of biological warfare. It didn't just kill, it rewrote. It targeted the very essence of a species' biology, unraveling their DNA and reassembling it into a crystalline, non-living matrix. It was silent, invisible, and transmitted by mere proximity to a latent carrier. The first victims on Titan simply stopped. They froze mid-sentence, their bodies stiffening, their skin taking on a faint, shimmering translucence before they shattered into a million glittering fragments. Like statues of spun glass struck by a hammer, the wardens, in their placid arrogance, misdiagnosed the initial outbreak. They saw it as a mining equipment malfunction, a localized energy field causing cellular disruption. They quarantined the Titan refineries but failed to grasp the terrifying subtlety of the contagion. By the time they realized their error, dozens of infected workers had already rotated back to Earth on scheduled shuttles. The plague hit Luna first, sweeping through the cramped warrens of Armstrong City with the speed of a whisper. Then it reached Earth. The consensus's response was swift and brutally logical. From their moon-sized vessel, beyond the orbit of Saturn, the local progenitor issued a decree that echoed in the mind of every sentient being in the system. The Sol system was now under a Class Omega quarantine. Nothing would be allowed in, and nothing would be allowed out. The LV-7 plague, they explained with cold and dispassionate sympathy, was incurable and represented an existential threat to the galactic ecosystem. Therefore, the infection had to be cauterized. They would not bomb humanity into oblivion that was crude and inefficient. Instead, they would simply wait for the plague to run its course. They sealed the system with an impenetrable energy barrier at the heliopause, cutting off all communication, all hope of escape. Then, the wardens left. Their graceful ships lifted from their embassies in Geneva and New York, their harmonious chimes falling silent as they ascended into the heavens, leaving humanity to die in a cage of their own making. It was a mercy, the progenitor's final message explained, a quiet, dignified end, preferable to the messy alternative. They had misjudged humanity's capacity for progress, and this was merely a correction, a pruning of a branch that had grown in a problematic direction. They were sorry for the inconvenience. The first year was chaos. As LV-7 spread, civilization fractured. The shimmering, chattering death was everywhere. It was a curse that could be carried for weeks without symptoms, turning loved ones into walking time bombs. Fear became the new currency. Governments collapsed, their authority meaningless against an enemy you couldn't see or fight. The United Earth Fleet, including Eva Rostova's small command, was helpless. Their weapons couldn't shoot a virus. Their ships couldn't breach the progenitor's quarantine wall. All they could do was try to maintain some semblance of order as the world they knew dissolved into glittering dust. Dr. Eris Thorne watched the end of his world from a reinforced biosafety lab buried deep beneath the Antarctic ice. Before the plague, Eris was a pariah, a brilliant xenobotanist whose theories on consensus technology were deemed radical and dangerous. He believed the progenitor's gifts were not gifts at all, but tools of control. subtly altering human biology and environment over generations to foster docility. He was dismissed as a conspiracy theorist. Now he was humanity's last hope, sequestered with a handful of other scientists who had been smart or paranoid enough to isolate themselves. He worked frantically to understand the plague. He dissected the crystalline remains of its victims, his heart aching as he analyzed the dust of people he had once known. He discovered the plague wasn't just a virus, it was a nanomachine swarm, a form of programmable matter that operated on quantum principles. It didn't just infect a cell, it replaced it, atom by atom. It was technology so far beyond human comprehension that fighting it felt like trying to punch a hurricane. Meanwhile, on the shattered surface of Earth, a different kind of evolution was taking place. Humanity, stripped of its technology and its illusions of safety, reverted to something older, something harder. In the ruins of cities where millions had turned to glass, small pockets of survivors banded together. They were led not by politicians or generals, but by the ruthless and the pragmatic. One such leader was a man known only as Silas, a former off-world cargo hauler. Silas had spent his life navigating the gray spaces of consensus law. He was a smuggler, a cynic, a survivor. When the plague hit, he didn't panic. He saw the world for what it had become, a hunting ground. He gathered a crew of like-minded individuals and began to scavenge, not just for food and water, but for something more valuable: information. He and his crews raided abandoned warden outposts and derelict consensus data hubs, risking plague exposure for any scrap of knowledge that might give them an edge. They learned to fear the shimmering dust, developing crude but effective detection methods and brutal quarantine protocols. If a member of his crew showed the slightest sign of the crystalline sheen on their skin, they were executed on the spot. It was monstrous, but it worked. Silas's group, the Crows, not only survived, they thrived. They became a legend in the wasteland, ghosts who moved through the ruins, their motto a grim reflection of their new reality. We adapt, or we shatter. Eva Rostova watched this brutal rebirth from orbit. With the central government gone, the remnants of the fleet had splintered. Most commanders tried to create mobile sanctuaries, protecting small flotillas of civilian ships, but they were just delaying the inevitable. The plague always found a way in. Eva chose a different path. She took the Starfall and a small squadron of cutters to the asteroid belt, a lawless region even before the collapse. There, she enforced a new kind of law, her law. She hunted pirates, protected fledgling mining colonies that had managed to isolate themselves, and gathered every piece of functional military hardware she could find. She turned her small force into a disciplined, hardened unit. Her sailors were no longer traffic cops. They were warriors waiting for a war. They stripped down their ships, retrofitting them with salvaged mining lasers and improvised kinetic weapons. They trained in tactics born of desperation, learning to fight in the deadly, three-dimensional chaos of the belt. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that the plague was only the first part of their extinction. The progenitors were patient, but their patience would eventually end. If by some miracle humanity survived the LV-7, the shepherds would return to finish the job. She wasn't just fighting to survive the present, she was preparing to fight the future. Back in Antarctica, Eris Thorne had a breakthrough. He couldn't stop the plague, but he discovered its command structure. The nanites weren't autonomous. They were networked, receiving constant instructions from a broadcast source. It was a single, repeating signal that permeated the entire solar system, originating from a progenitor beacon hidden somewhere in the Oort cloud. The signal was their heartbeat, their guiding light, and Eris, the disgraced scientist, the quiet botanist, realized that if you could disrupt the signal, you might be able to disrupt the plague. But the signal was encoded with a complexity that made his mind ache. It wasn't just data, it was a form of reality-warping mathematics, a language that shaped physical laws. Cracking it was impossible, so he decided not to crack it. He decided to poison it, and he began working on a counter-agent. Not a cure, but a competing signal, a mimetic virus coded into a modulated neutrino burst, designed to introduce a single, catastrophic error into the plague's core programming. Instead of replacing organic matter with inert crystal, his modified plague would be instructed to do something else entirely. The math was maddening, the risks astronomical. If he got it wrong, he could accelerate the plague, or worse, transform it into something even more horrifying. He needed more data, more processing power, and access to a transmitter powerful enough to fire a focused neutrino beam across the entire solar system. He needed technology that was rusting in the ruins of the Warden's data centers, guarded by the ghosts of the plague and ruthless survivors like Silas. And he needed a way to get a message to the one person who might have the will and the means to help him, Captain Eva Rostova, the last commander of a fleet that no longer existed, a woman preparing for a war against gods. Humanity was dying, trapped in a cage and left to rot by its creators, but in the frozen dark at the bottom of the world, in the lawless expanse of the asteroid belt, and in the dust-choked ruins of forgotten cities, something new was being forged. Not hope, but a weapon made of rage, grief, and the terrible, indomitable will of a species that had been pushed too far. The progenitors thought they were pruning a problematic branch. They had no idea they were watering a seed of vengeance with the blood of billions, and that the tree that grew from it would reach for the stars not in peace, but with thorns of fire, ready to tear their placid garden apart. The quiet of the cosmos was about to be broken by the sound of a human scream, a sound the galaxy would learn to fear for millennia to come. The asteroid belt was a tombstone for 1,000 failed ambitions, and Eva Rostova had made it her kingdom, her fleet, a motley collection of 3 retrofitted defense cutters and a dozen heavily armed mining tugs shifted in the shadow of Pallas, a jagged shard of rock and ice that shielded them from the casual gaze of long-range sensors. Life in the belt was a constant, grinding war for resources, fought not against an alien plague but against other humans. The collapse had not united humanity. It had atomized it, creating countless desperate tribes, each clinging to its own small island of survival. Eva's tribe was the 7th Fleet, the last remnant of the United Earth Fleet, and their island was the carrier-class asteroid hauler they had captured and renamed Golgotha. It was their fortress, their factory, and their home. The incident with the fallen angel was still fresh in the crew's minds, a stark reminder of the new laws they lived by. The Angel was a civilian transport, its hull crammed with over 3,000 souls from the European colonies, their biosphere failing. They had broadcast a desperate plea for sanctuary, and Eva's first officer, a young idealist named Ren, had argued passionately for mercy. Eva had seen the cold calculus Ren refused to accept. The Angel's life support was failing because their water recyclers were contaminated, a perfect breeding ground for the LV-7 plague, and taking them in would have been a death sentence for the entire fleet. She denied their request. The Angel's captain, driven mad by the cries of his dying passengers, had responded with a suicidal charge, his ship's primitive plasma drives burning hot with rage. Eva gave the order without flinching. The fleet's mining lasers, never intended for war, lanced out and carved the fallen angel into incandescent pieces. There were no survivors. Afterward, in the sterile silence of her ready room, Ren had confronted her, his face a mask of grief and fury. They were human. He choked out. They were a threat. Eva had replied, her voice as cold and empty as the void outside. The moment they charged us, they stopped being refugees and became a weapon aimed at our heart. In this world, you are either a weapon or a target. There is no third option. She had watched the light die in Ren's eyes, the last spark of the old world's morality extinguished by the brutal logic of the new. She hated herself for it, but she hated the alternative more. Every soul in her fleet was her responsibility, and she would burn 1,000 ships full of strangers to keep them alive. It was this chilling pragmatism that kept her fleet intact, that earned her the unwavering loyalty of those who understood the price of survival. Deep beneath the Antarctic ice, in the humming solitude of Umbra Base, Dr. Aris Thorne was losing his grip on sanity. For 2 years he had lived in a sterile tomb, his only companions the ghosts on his monitors and the maddening, elegant mathematics of the plague. He no longer slept. He merely entered brief periods of metabolic stasis, his mind continuing to race through quantum equations, even in unconsciousness. His breakthrough, the discovery of the plague's broadcast signal, had been a moment of pure, terrifying elation. He had found the enemy's command center, the voice that told the nanites how to kill. Now, he was crafting his reply. He called it the Kane Protocol. It was a mimetic exploit, a sliver of corrupted logic hidden inside a neutrino pulse. His poison pill, the progenitor signal, was a command: disassemble and replace. It was clean, efficient, a song of perfect entropy. Eris's Kane Protocol was a scream of flawed human chaos. It was designed to latch on to the primary broadcast and insert a new, overriding command: assimilate and weaponize. If he was successful, the nanite swarm would stop shattering its victims. Instead, it would begin to rebuild them, transforming the crystalline matrix from an inert statue into a programmable, sentient lattice. It would turn the plague from a tool of extinction into a tool of transfiguration. The victims would still be lost, their consciousness gone forever, but their bodies, their very atoms, would become something new, a network of crystalline soldiers, immune to the vacuum of space, controlled by a new broadcast signal, a signal he could control. It was a monstrous idea, a desecration of the dead on a scale that beggared imagination, but it was the only weapon he could conceive that might give humanity a fighting chance. But the theory was worthless without the means to implement it. The calculations required to finalize the Kane Protocol were beyond Umbra Base's computers, and the power needed to transmit it required a neutrino-focusing array, technology only found in the abandoned Warden Communications Hub in the Gobi Desert. He was trapped at the bottom of the world, a prophet with a world-saving revelation and no way to share it. Desperate, he jury-rigged the base's deep space comms dish, bypassing every safety protocol. He encoded his preliminary findings, a condensed package of data outlining the plague's nature and the theoretical basis for his protocol, and aimed it at the heavens. It was a single, tight beam burst, a desperate message in a bottle thrown into an ocean of static, aimed at the general coordinates of the asteroid belt, the last rumored location of any organized human fleet. He poured every watt of the station's remaining power into the broadcast, and then the base went dark and silent, its systems fried, plunging him into a cold, terrifying isolation. The message tore through the void at the speed of light, a whisper of salvation that was never meant for the ears of Silas. His command ship, the Carrion, a stripped-down, long-haul freighter bristling with salvaged weapons, was lurking in the Trojan asteroids, a vulture waiting for a fresh kill. The Crows were masters of listening. They had spent 2 years perfecting the art of passive surveillance, their networks of stolen sensors and comm jacks sucking up every stray signal in the system. They heard the distress calls of dying colonies, the coded threats of rival warlords, and the faint, looping propaganda broadcasts from automated stations that didn't know the world had ended. When Eris's data burst sliced through the chatter, their systems flagged it instantly. It was tight, encrypted, and powerful, the calling card of high-level military or consensus tech. Silas's data slicers, a crew of pale, caffeine-addicted prodigies who lived in the carrion server rooms, descended upon the signal like starving wolves. It took them 3 days to peel back the layers of encryption, and when they did, Silas found himself staring at the most valuable commodity in the known universe, a chance. He wasn't a scientist, but he understood the implications immediately. A scientist trapped on Earth had found a way to turn the plague into an army he could control. But the scientist needed a ride, and he needed hardware from one of the most dangerous, plague-infested places on the planet. And the message had been aimed at the belt, at Eva Rostova's fleet. Silas spat a stream of amasec onto the grated floor of his bridge. Rostova, the last of the old-world idealists, playing soldier in her shiny, disciplined fleet. He despised her kind, the ones who clung to flags and regulations as the world burned around them, but he also respected her. Her fleet was the only power in the system that could realistically pull off an extraction from Earth's surface and live to tell the tale. He had the map. She had the transport. A partnership was necessary, however distasteful. He ordered his comms officer to open a channel to the Golgotha, using an old fleet emergency frequency he'd saved for a special occasion. Eva was overseeing a weapons diagnostic on the Starfall when the call came through. The voice that crackled over her command channel was rough, laced with a cynical amusement that set her teeth on edge. "Captain Rostova," Silas began, foregoing any call signs or pleasantries. "My name is Silas. You and I have a mutual acquaintance who is in desperate need of a ride. I suggest you listen very carefully to what I have to say next, because it might just be the key to saving our miserable species." He played a snippet of Eris's recording, just enough for Eva's science officers to verify its authenticity, the complex quantum mechanics, the chillingly accurate analysis of the nanite swarm. Eva's blood ran cold. It was real. For 2 years, she had been fighting a holding action, a slow retreat against inevitable extinction. This message, this voice from the grave of Earth, was the first glimmer of a counterattack she had seen. But it was being delivered by a jackal, a man she knew by reputation as a ruthless opportunist. "What's your price, Silas?" she asked, her voice flat and hard. The amusement returned to his tone. "My price? Oh, it's quite reasonable. I want in. My people, my ships. Become an auxiliary wing of your fleet. We get access to your repair bays, your med bays, your food processors. We fly under your banner, so to speak. And I get a seat on your command council. I'm tired of scavenging for scraps. Captain, I want to eat at the big table." It was an audacious demand. He wanted to merge his band of pirates with her disciplined military unit, to poison her command structure with his cynical, self-serving worldview. Ren and the other traditionalists would see it as a deal with the devil, but Silas had her. He had the location of the scientist, and without that, they were all just waiting to die. "You will subordinate your ships to my command," Eva stated, not a request but a term. "Your captains will follow my orders without question. Your resources will be integrated into my fleet's supply chain. You will not get a seat on my council. You will get a liaison position. You will advise. I will command. Those are my terms." A long silence stretched across the void. Eva could picture him on his filthy bridge, weighing his options. He needed her as much as she needed him. "You drive a hard bargain, Captain," Silas said at last, a grudging respect in his voice. "Fine. We have a deal. I'm transmitting the coordinates to you now. A place called Umbra Base, Antarctica. I suggest you start planning. Going back to Earth is going to be a bitch." The transmission cut out, leaving Eva alone on her bridge, the coordinates glowing on her main screen, a map leading to a frozen hell, a potential savior, and a pact with a devil who might just be as dangerous as the gods who had abandoned them. She had spent 2 years building a fortress to protect her people from the horrors outside. Now, she had to lead them out of it, back into the heart of the nightmare. The war for survival was over. The war for vengeance was about to begin. The descent into Earth's gravity well was like a pilgrimage to a dead god's tomb. From orbit, the planet was still deceptively beautiful, a swirl of white clouds and deep blue oceans, a marble of impossible life in the sterile void. But as the Starfall and its 2 escort cutters, the Vigilance and the Trident, burned through the upper atmosphere, the illusion shattered. The night side of the planet was no longer a glittering web of city lights. It was an almost unbroken blanket of darkness, punctuated by the faint, orange glow of vast, uncontrolled fires that had been burning for years. The dayside revealed scars that no map had ever charted. Coastlines were altered, river deltas clogged with the crystalline dust of shattered cities. From low orbit, Eva could see the skeletal remains of what was once Shanghai, as towers now glittering, translucent spires, a grotesque monument to the plague. The air itself crackled with a strange energy, the lingering resonance of the progenitor broadcast. It was a psychic hum that scraped at the edges of the mind, a constant, low-level reminder of the enemy's omnipresence. Silas's fleet, a dozen ugly, functional ships he called his murder of crows, followed at a respectful distance. Their presence was a constant irritant. Their comms channels were a chaotic mess of slang and gallows humor, a stark contrast to the clipped, professional discipline of Eva's fleet. Silas himself had taken up residence in her tactical center aboard the Golgotha, which remained in high orbit as a command and control hub. He was a ghost in her machine, his grizzled, cynical face appearing on her hollow displays to offer unsolicited advice and wry commentary. He was, to her surprise, an astute strategist, his knowledge of Earth's ruined infrastructure and the feral politics of the survivor enclaves proving invaluable. He was also a parasite, and she knew he was scanning her fleet's systems, cataloging their strengths and weaknesses for some future betrayal. For now, their unholy alliance held, bound by the fragile hope buried under the Antarctic ice. The plan was a 3-pronged spear thrust. Eva's squadron would provide orbital support and a rapid extraction team. Silas's crows, with their intimate knowledge of wasteland survival, would handle the ground approach, securing a perimeter around the Warden Communications Hub in the Gobi Desert. A third team, a small, specialized unit led by Eva's second-in-command, Commander Jian, would take a suborbital transport, the Stiletto, on a high-risk, low-altitude flight to Antarctica to retrieve Dr. Thorne. It was a plan with 1,000 points of failure, each one ending in a glittering, silent death. The first sign of trouble came not from the plague, but from the savage, desperate remnants of humanity. As Jian's transport screamed over the skeletal remains of the Indian subcontinent, they were engaged by ground-based defenses. Survivor faction, styling themselves the Children of Glass, had salvaged and reactivated a network of pre-consensus kinetic strike platforms. They were religious fanatics who worshipped the plague as a divine crucible, believing the crystalline transformation was a form of ascension. They saw Jian's ship as a blasphemous intrusion from the unchosen. The stiletto juked and weaved through a storm of hypersonic projectiles, its hull groaning under the strain. On the Starfalls Bridge, Eva watched the tactical plot with a heart of ice. "Jian, status," she demanded, her voice betraying none of the fear coiling in her gut. "Taking heavy fire." "Commander." Jian's voice was strained but steady. "Shields at 30%. We can't shake them. They've got our trajectory locked." Silas's face flickered onto the screen. "Told you the surface was crawling with crazies. Orbital strike is your only play. Captain, glass the whole damn peninsula." Eva ignored him. A full orbital strike would not only kill Jian, but it would also announce their presence to every hostile faction within 1,000 kilometers. "Vigilance. Trident. Execute pattern Epsilon," she ordered. "Target the launch sites, not the city. Surgical strikes only. Minimize collateral damage." It was a risky move, asking her cutters to fire precisely into a chaotic ground battle from a decaying orbit. But it was the only move that didn't sacrifice her people. For 3 terrifying minutes, lances of pure energy stabbed down from the heavens, guided by Jian's frantic targeting data. The ground fire ceased as abruptly as it began. "Launch sites neutralized," the Vigilance's captain reported. "Stiletto is clear." Eva allowed herself a single, sharp exhale. They had survived the first test. Jian's team found Umbra Base entombed in ice and silence. The power failure had triggered a catastrophic flash freeze, encasing the exterior in a sheath of glacial ice hundreds of feet thick. Her engineers had to use mining charges to blast their way in, the explosions echoing across the desolate landscape. Inside, they found a ghost. Eris Thorn was skeletal, his skin translucent from malnutrition, his eyes wide with a feverish, manic energy. He was alive, but barely, having survived on emergency nutrient paste and recycled water. He had spent the last several months in absolute darkness, the only light the faint glow of his emergency data slate, his mind his only companion. He greeted Jian's team not with relief, but with a torrent of equations and frantic warnings. "The signal, it's evolving," he rasped, his voice raw from disuse. "The progenitors aren't just broadcasting a static command. They're refining it, adapting it to our biology. The plague is becoming more efficient. We don't have much time." They bundled the fragile scientist and his precious data slates aboard the Stiletto, pumping him full of stimulants and nutrients. The man was a shadow, but his mind was a supernova. And as Jian listened to his fevered explanations on the flight to the Gobi, she began to understand the terrible, magnificent scope of what he was proposing. He wasn't just offering a weapon, he was offering a new form of life, a terrifying apotheosis born from the ashes of their species. Meanwhile, in the Gobi Desert, Silas's crows were meeting a different kind of resistance. The Warden Communications Hub was a sprawling complex of elegant, crystalline towers that stabbed into the sand-blasted sky, a place of serene, alien beauty. It was also a graveyard. The entire Warden staff had succumbed to the plague during the initial outbreak, their shimmering, shattered remains littering the silent corridors. But the facility was not unguarded. The Wardens, in their infinite foresight, had left behind automated defense systems sleek, insectoid drones that patrolled the halls with silent, lethal efficiency. They were not programmed for war day, but for security, designed to neutralize unauthorized personnel with non-lethal energy pulses, but against the unshielded, fragile biology of humans. Non-lethal was a relative term. The pulses caused catastrophic neurological damage, effectively boiling the brain inside the skull. Silas's men, hardened wasteland warriors accustomed to brutal, noisy firefights, were unprepared for the silent, lightning-fast attacks of the drones. They lost 6 crows in the first 10 minutes, their bodies twitching on the polished floors, their minds wiped clean. Silas, monitoring the assault from the Golgotha, cursed with a venom that made Eva's tactical officers flinch. He had underestimated the automated defenses. "Pull them out, Silas," Eva ordered, her tone sharp. "We'll soften it up from orbit." "Negative, Captain," he shot back. His pride stung. "My boys don't run. Just give us a schematic of the facility. We'll find the drone control center and shut them down from the inside." It was a bloody, costly strategy, but Eva knew it was the only way. An orbital strike risked damaging the delicate neutrino array they needed. She ordered her sensor technicians to perform a deep scan of the hub, relaying a 3-dimensional schematic to Silas. For the next hour, she could only listen to the grim, chaotic chatter as the crows fought their way through the pristine, silent facility, hunting a ghost in a machine. They found the control center at the cost of another 12 lives. With the drones deactivated, the hub fell silent, the only sound the wind whistling through the shattered crystal remains of its former masters. When the stiletto arrived, the scene was a strange tableau of the old world and the new. The elegant, alien architecture of the Warden hub was marred by the crude fortifications of Silas's crows. Heavily armed scavengers stood guard over technology they couldn't possibly comprehend, their grimy armor a stark contrast to the sterile, self-cleaning walls. Eris Thorn, looking like a resurrected corpse, was carried into the heart of the facility, his eyes drinking in the sight of the neutrino focusing array. It was a magnificent piece of engineering, a massive, multi-story gyroscope of interlocking rings suspended in a magnetic field, humming with latent power. "It's beautiful," Eris whispered, a tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. They built their own execution chamber. Getting the array online was a nightmare. The Warden technology was intuitive, but it was designed for the Warden's unique psionic interface. Eris and Eva's engineers had to jury-rig crude physical interfaces, splicing human tech into the alien systems. It was like performing brain surgery with a sledgehammer. For 3 days, they worked without rest, fueled by stimulants and desperation, while Silas's crows stood guard against the encroaching horrors of the wasteland. They fought off roving bands of cannibals, repelled probes from the Children of Glass, and shot down the mutated, plague-scarred beasts that now roamed the deserts. On the 3rd day, a klaxon blared through the facility. A long-range sensor, one of the few Silas's crew had managed to reactivate, had picked up something, a single, massive energy signature, descending from high orbit, heading directly for their location. It wasn't a ship. It was too small, too fast. On the starfall, Eva watched the contact on her screen, a cold dread washing over her. It was a consensus sanction, a high-yield, kinetic strike weapon, a tungsten rod the size of a skyscraper, designed not to explode but to impact with such force that it would crack the planet's crust. The progenitors had noticed them. They had seen the lights in their abandoned comms hub, heard the faint whispers of their activity. Their period of patient observation was over. The pruning was about to become a culling. "Aris, how much longer?" Eva's voice was a steel wire over the comm. "I need hours, days, maybe," the scientist shrieked back, his voice cracking with panic. "The power sequencing is a nightmare. You have 20 minutes. Eva replied, her voice deadly calm. 20 minutes, or we are all cosmic dust. The tungsten rod, a silver needle of judgment, began its final, fiery descent, a period mark at the end of humanity's last, desperate sentence. The 20 minutes Eva had given Eris was a lie, and she knew it. The kinetic rod, dropping from synchronous orbit, was traveling at a significant fraction of the speed of light. Her tactical computer estimated 12 minutes until impact, 12 minutes to save the world, while God threw a rock at them. Panic was a luxury her crew could not afford. On the bridge of the Starfall, the disciplined quiet was replaced by a controlled storm of activity as officers relayed targeting solutions and damage control reports. Evasive maneuvers Eva commanded, her voice cutting through the rising tension. Get us between that rock and the Gobi. All fleet assets. Form a shield wall. Divert all non-essential power to forward deflectors. We are going to try and catch it. It was an insane tactic. A gnat trying to stop a bullet. The combined energy shields of her small fleet, even augmented by Silas's crude but powerful salvage ships, would be shredded instantly by a direct impact. But they didn't have to stop it. They just had to slow it down, to deflect it, even by a fraction of a degree. A near miss would still create a cataclysmic impact, but it might spare the communications hub from direct annihilation. Captain, Silas is on the line, her comms officer reported, his voice tight. He says, and I quote, "Are you out of your goddamn mind? Put him on," Eva snapped. Silas's face appeared, contorted with a mixture of disbelief and fury. Rostova, what is this kamikaze bullshit? My ships aren't designed to tank a planet killer. We need to scatter. Get as far away from the impact zone as we can. Your ships will hold the line. Silas, or I will personally space you, Eva retorted, her eyes blazing with an intensity that made even the hardened warlord flinch. That scientist is our only hope. If he dies, we all die. We just die slower. You wanted a seat at the big table. This is the price of admission. Now get your garbage scows in formation. For a heartbeat. Silas stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a slow, grim smile spread across his face. It was a terrifying sight. You know, for a military stiff, you've got a real pirate's heart. Captain, the screen went blank. And on the tactical display, the chaotic cluster of crow ships began to move, slotting into formation alongside her cutters, their ugly angular hulls forming a patchwork shield against the coming apocalypse. Down in the Gobi, Eris Thorne was a man possessed. He no longer saw the engineers and soldiers around him. He saw only the flowing, iridescent light of the Warden control interfaces and the beautiful, terrible mathematics of his Kane protocol. He was a concert pianist playing a symphony on a burning piano, his fingers flying across the holographic controls, forcing the alien technology to bend to his will. He was a force of nature, a conduit for humanity's collective rage and grief, pouring it all into a single focused scream of defiance. The hub's massive power core, a contained singularity, whined as he drew more and more energy, the lights in the facility flickering, the very air thrumming with power. Power conduits are overloading, one of Eva's engineers shouted over the din. The containment field is starting to buckle. Then let it break. Eris screamed back, his eyes fixated on the final lines of code. He was no longer just a scientist. He was a high priest, preparing a blood sacrifice to a new and terrible god of his own creation. He had the power sequence. He had the targeting solution. All he needed was to press the button, but he hesitated. His protocol would not just create an army of the dead. It would send a feedback pulse through the progenitor broadcast network, a psychic shockwave that would echo across their entire system. It wouldn't kill them, but it would hurt them. It would let them know that the ants they had tried to step on were biting back. It would be a declaration of war, a war humanity was hopelessly unprepared for. It was the point of no return. In the void above Vaesi, the kinetic rod filled the forward view screen of the starfall. It was no longer a silver needle, but a mountain of incandescent metal, its surface glowing white-hot from atmospheric friction. The fleet's shields flared to life, a multi-layered dome of shimmering energy. "Brace for impact," Eva yelled, her hands gripping the command chair so tightly her knuckles were white. The impact was not a sound. It was a physical blow that traveled through the hull of the ship, a deep, resonant clang that vibrated in the bones of every crew member. The world outside the viewport dissolved into a sun-bright flash of annihilating energy. On the bridge, consoles exploded in showers of sparks, and the ship screamed in protest as a dozen systems failed at once. The forward deflectors, pushed beyond every conceivable limit, held for a fraction of a second before shattering like glass, the excess energy washing over the ship's armored hull. The starfall was thrown backward like a child's toy, its internal gravity plating failing, sending crew members tumbling through the air. Eva was slammed against her restraints, the force of the impact stealing the breath from her lungs, her vision tunneling to a single point of light. They had failed. And yet, through the chaos, she heard the damage control officer's report, a voice laced with pure, unadulterated shock. Impact deflected. The weapon is tumbling. It's off course. Eva dragged herself back to her console, her body a symphony of pain. On the tactical display, she saw the impossible. Their shield wall had not broken the kinetic rod, but it had introduced a fractional instability, causing it to yaw just enough. It was still going to hit the planet, but instead of the Gobi, its trajectory was now pointing toward the North Atlantic. They had bought Eris his time, at the cost of half their fleet. The Vigilance was gone, vaporized instantly. The Trident was adrift, its spine broken. Most of Silas's ships were little more than drifting slag, but the Starfall and the Golgotha in its high orbit had survived. The seismic shockwave from the impact reached the Gobi hub moments later. The ground heaved, and the crystalline Warden Towers, brittle after years of neglect, began to sing a high, keening note before shattering, collapsing into a billion glittering shards. The neutrino array, protected by its own inertial dampeners, held firm, but the rest of the facility was coming down around them. "Doctor!" Now Jian yelled, firing her sidearm at a collapsing section of the ceiling, trying to buy him a few more seconds. Eris Thorn looked up from his console, his face serene. He had seen Eva's fleet sacrifice themselves. He had felt the planet itself cry out in agony. His moment of doubt had passed. With a steady hand, he activated the Kane protocol. There was no sound, no flash of light. A beam of neutrinos, invisible and intangible, lanced up from the desert, slicing through the planet, through the atmosphere, and into the cold, uncaring void. It was a single silent word, spoken in the language of creation, aimed at the heart of the enemy. The war had begun. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, all across the planet, the shimmering dust of the plague's victims began to glow. From the ruins of Shanghai to the plains of Africa, from the bottom of the oceans to the highest mountain peaks, a soft, ethereal light emanated from the crystalline remains of billions of dead. The progenitor broadcast signal, the song of entropy, faltered. A new note had been introduced into the symphony, a discordant, chaotic chord of human rage. The crystal began to reform. It flowed like liquid metal, coalescing, rising. It formed limbs, torsos, and heads, not of flesh and blood, but of a shimmering, semi-sentient lattice. They were silent, featureless, their forms vaguely humanoid but utterly alien. On the bridge of the starfall, Eva watched the planetary sensor readings with a dawning sense of awe and horror. Biosignatures were appearing all over the planet, where moments before there had been none. Billions of them. Eris's weapon had worked. He had given them an army of ghosts. Her comms channel crackled to life. Was Eris, his voice weak but triumphant, broadcast from a handheld unit amidst the collapsing ruins of the hub. Phase 1 is complete. Captain, he whispered, they are awake, but they are dormant, waiting. I can't control them from here. The broadcast was a one-time event. To command them, to give them purpose. I need to become the signal. Eva didn't understand. What do you mean? Eris, the sound of grinding metal and shattering crystal nearly drowned out his reply. Gion's voice cut in, shouting, we have to go. The whole place is coming down. There's a synaptic interface in the array's control core, Eris explained, his voice growing fainter. It was meant for the Wardens. It can integrate an organic consciousness with the neutrino broadcast. I can become the ghost in their machine. Captain, I can lead them. It's the only way. Eva felt a cold knot of dread form in her stomach. He was talking about sacrificing himself, about dissolving his own consciousness into an energy stream to become the mind of a planetary ghost army. It was a monstrous, beautiful, and utterly insane idea. Eris, get out of there, she ordered. That's an order. Doctor, we will find another way. The only reply was a soft, sad chuckle. There is no other way. They called me a conspiracy theorist for believing they were controlling us. Now I'm going to show them what real control looks like. Tell them I remembered the sun. Eva. The line went dead. Eva stared at the silent comms panel, the scientist's last, cryptic words echoing in her mind. Then, from the planet below, a new energy source flared into existence. A psychic scream that made every human in the fleet clutch their heads in agony. It was a signal of pure, focused consciousness, a will of unimaginable power, spreading across the globe, and every single crystalline figure on the planet turned its blank, featureless face toward the stars, as if listening to a voice only they could hear. The army of the dead had found its general. The silence that followed the birth of the ghost army was more terrifying than any battle. For 3 days, a dead planet teeming with billions of silent, crystalline soldiers stared up at the heavens, motionless. Aboard the crippled remnants of the fleet in high orbit, humanity held its breath. They were adrift in a sea of their own making, caught between the wrath of the gods who had tried to erase them and the horrifying, unknown potential of the weapon they had just unleashed. The psychic shockwave of Eris Thorne's ascension had seared through the fleet, a wave of pure, unfiltered human consciousness grief, rage, memory, and a terrifying, transcendent purpose. It left a phantom echo in the minds of the survivors, a constant, low-level thrum of a mind vaster and colder than any they had ever known. They could feel Eris, or what was left of him, a disembodied intelligence woven into the fabric of the planet, a ghost in the machine of his own terrible creation. Eva Rostova felt it most keenly. His last words to her, "Tell them I remembered the sun," haunted her waking moments and her brief, tortured attempts at sleep. It was a message of defiance, a final, poetic assertion of his humanity before he became something else entirely. She had won. She had secured the weapon. But in doing so, she had midwifed the birth of a new god, and she had no idea if it was a savior or a destroyer. Silas, ever the pragmatist, was the first to adapt to the new reality. His fleet was shattered, his power base decimated, but he saw opportunity in the ashes. He appeared on Eva's view screen, his face bruised and his usual cynical smirk replaced by a look of predatory focus. "So, the egghead actually did it," he said, his voice raspy. "He turned our dead into a loaded gun. The question is, Captain, who gets to pull the trigger?" Eva stared at his image, her expression a mask of weary resolve. "Eris is in control," she stated, though she wasn't sure if she believed it herself. "He is the trigger." Silas let out a harsh laugh. "Eris is a voice on the wind. Rostova, a ghost. Ghosts don't give orders. They haunt. This army needs a commander, a living one. Someone to interpret the ghost's whispers and point this gun at the enemy. Someone like you, or someone like me." And the unspoken threat hung in the air between them. The fleet was fractured, their strength broken. The crows who had survived were fanatically loyal to Silas. Eva's own crew was exhausted and demoralized. A power struggle now would be suicidal, but Silas was a jackal. He smelled weakness, and he was positioning himself for a coup. Before Eva could respond, a klaxon screamed through the bridge. "Energy signature!" the tactical officer shouted, his voice cracking. "Massive. At the edge of the system, it's the progenitor vessel, the moon-sized ship, which had remained a silent, brooding presence beyond Saturn for years, was finally on the move. It wasn't accelerating rapidly. It was simply coming. A mountain falling from the sky in slow motion, its intent as cold and clear as the void. The shepherds were returning to their garden, not with a pruning shear this time, but with fire to burn it down to the bedrock. The progenitor's arrival was the catalyst. As its overwhelming psychic presence washed over the inner solar system, the ghost army on Earth finally moved. In unison, a billion crystalline figures tilted their heads back, and from their featureless faces, a single harmonious chord of psychic energy erupted, a response to Eris's silent command. It was a song of pure, weaponized grief. Then, they began to march. They flowed into the oceans, their dense bodies sinking into the abyssal plains, and began to tear apart the planet's tectonic plates, seeking out the rich veins of rare metals and silicates they needed to grow. They climbed the skeletons of ruined skyscrapers, merging with the metal and glass, creating new, impossible structures that scraped the toxic clouds. Earth was no longer a tomb, it was a factory for warships. Eva and Silas could only watch in stunned silence as their world remade itself. From the oceans rose continent-sized masses of living crystal, shaped by Eris's will into vessels that defied all known principles of engineering. They were not built, they were grown, vast, crystalline warships shaped like thorns and daggers, humming with a power that made the fleet's sensors scream. The ghost army was building a fleet from the corpse of their own world. The progenitor vessel, still days away, seemed to sense this blasphemous act of creation. It changed its approach. It began to sing. It was not a sound, but a wave of pure, deconstructive energy. The original plague signal amplified 1,000-fold. It was a command that screamed disassemble at the very fabric of reality. The newly formed crystal ships on Earth began to vibrate, threatening to shatter back into dust. On the bridge of the Starfall, a new voice spoke, not over the comms, but inside every mind. It was Eris. His voice was no longer human. It was a chorus of 1 billion dead souls, a river of consciousness that was both intimately familiar and terrifyingly alien. "They are unmaking us," he said, the words echoing with the cold of the grave. "Their song is stronger. I cannot hold the fleet together on my own. I need an amplifier, a focus. I need a living mind to anchor mine." Eva understood instantly. He needed a queen for his hive, a living conduit to bridge the gap between his disembodied consciousness and the physical world. Her eyes met Silas's across the view screen. For the first time, she saw genuine fear in the warlord's eyes. He had wanted to control the gun, but he had never imagined becoming part of it. "It has to be one of us," Eva said, her voice quiet, a mind strong enough to withstand the connection without shattering. It was a choice between two futures. Silas, the cynical survivor, would wield the army with ruthless pragmatism, turning it into a tool of conquest and personal power. He would save humanity by making it a monster in his own image. Eva, the reluctant commander, would wield it with discipline and restraint, a shield to protect what little remained of their species' soul, even if it meant risking annihilation. "It's you, Captain," Silas said, his voice a low growl of resignation and, perhaps, relief. "It was always going to be you. You're the one who still believes in flags and saviors. Go on. Go be a god." He cut the connection, his final act a surrender, not to her, but to the terrifying, noble ideal she represented. Eva walked to the bridge's main hollow interface. "Ren," she said to her first officer, her voice steady, "you have the con. Get the fleet to a safe distance. Protect the civilians. That is your final order." She placed her hands on the cool, glowing surface of the interface, closed her eyes, and opened her mind. "Eris," she sent, a single, focused thought. "I'm here." The connection was a torrent of fire and ice. 1 billion voices screamed in her mind. 1 billion lives cut short. 1 billion memories of sunlight and laughter and love, all curdled into a singular, focused desire for vengeance. She saw the plague from the inside, felt the cold, elegant mathematics of her own dissolution. She felt Eris's own consciousness, a lonely, brilliant star in a galaxy of ghosts, holding them all together through sheer force of will. He was failing. The progenitor's song was tearing him apart. Eva did not fight the wave. She embraced it. She let the grief and the rage flow through her, but she did not let it consume her. She anchored it with her own sense of duty, her discipline, her unwavering commitment to her people. She became the iron framework for Eris's storm, the vessel that could contain his infinite rage without shattering. She became the commander the ghost army needed. Together, she projected, her mind and Eris's merging into a single, terrifying consciousness. Her will, amplified by his, became a psychic command that dwarfed the progenitor's song. "We remember the sun." The effect was instantaneous. On Earth, the crystal fleet solidified, its vessels now glowing with an internal, golden light. They rose from the planet, a fleet of avenging angels carved from the bones of the dead, their forms now sharper, more purposeful. They were not just ships, they were an extension of a singular, unified will. Eva's will. The new fleet, humanity's ghost fleet, moved to intercept the progenitor vessel. The battle was not fought with weapons of metal and energy, but with the fundamental forces of creation and dissolution. The progenitor sang its song of entropy. The ghost fleet, with Eva and Eris at its heart, sang a chorus of grief, memory, and defiance. The two forces met in the void between worlds, and reality itself buckled. Stars flickered. The cold laws of physics were momentarily suspended. From the bridge of the Golgotha, Silas and the last remnants of humanity watched as gods clashed. They saw the progenitor vessel, a thing of perfect agile geometry, begin to fracture, its song of unmaking unable to erase a force that was built from the very memory of what it had destroyed. The ghost fleet swarmed it, not firing weapons, but simply touching it. And everywhere they touched, the progenitor vessel remembered it was matter. It remembered it could be broken. Cracks of golden light spread across its moon-sized hull. It died not with an explosion, but with a final, silent sigh of submission, shattering into a trillion glittering fragments, a mirror of the death it had visited upon humanity. The war was over. The silence that returned was different. It was no longer the silence of fear, but of awe. Humanity had survived. They had faced their creators and had torn them down, but the cost was a world and a humanity. That was forever changed. Eva Rostova was gone, and in her place was the mind of a fleet, the conscious will of a ghost army. She was the protector of the last human survivors, but she was no longer one of them. She, Ere, and the billions of souls they commanded had become the new progenitors, the new shepherds, but they would not tend a garden. They were the eternal, silent guardians of a single, sacred principle, a warning etched into the fabric of the cosmos for any who might listen. Humanity does not die quietly. The galaxy held its breath, for the quiet of the cosmos had been broken forever, and the universe would never again forget the sound of a human scream.